Hello, everyone. Hello. Good, great. My name is Osiakwan, and I'm from Ghana. I'm going to be talking to you about Africa, but I want to just take a reality check in the room. Who in this room thinks Africa is a country, not a continent? Okay, you got it. All right. But the other thing that you don't know about Africa is the size of Africa. So as you can see, I click forward. So I want to talk to you about, first about the size of Africa. Africa is so huge that you can fit Europe, United States, China, and still have room for India, and you name it. So this is the true size of Africa. It's a very, very big continent. Africa currently has a population of about 1 billion. Out of that 1 billion population, 70% are youth. The UN projects that in the next 10 to 20 years, Africa's population is going to grow by 2.4 billion. So 1 in every 4 inhabitants of this earth is going to be African. And out of that, 70% or less is going to be youthful. So the future is African. The future marketplace is Africa. So it's important for you to know more about Africa, and that's what I'm going to try to do, and conclude by telling you about the countries that are really building the digital economy in Africa. Now, Africa actually was expected to industrialize in the dawn of the 21st century, like every other continent. However, Africa went a different way. In the late 90s, Africa adopted cell phones. And what happened was that between 1998 and 2008, we had an explosion of cell phones across Africa. Actually, in 1998, there were more landlines in Manhattan alone than the whole of Africa. 10 years on, Africa had more cell phones than the whole of the United States. So within a decade, something happened to the extent that, according to this chart, adult cell phone ownership in Africa is at par with the United States. You can see a few countries like South Africa, Ghana, Kenya, at the same level with the United States. This explosion of cell phones was met with the building of submarine cables. As you can see on this map, in 2008, the whole of Africa had 1 submarine cable, which was the way by which it connected to the rest of the world. So most of our connectivity was through satellite, which was very slow and expensive. I was part of a team that built the first submarine cable in East Africa called the TEAMS cable, the East African Marine System. And between 2008 and 2012, we had about 8 more submarine cables being built. Now, these submarine cables then connected to the cell phone networks. And so Africa became not only a mobile first, but a mobile web continent. So in Africa, the cell phone that you have in your hand is actually the computer. Most Africans are seeing the internet or are connected to the world through the web on their phone. So Africa is a mobile web generation. And then what we began to see was a new generation of entrepreneurs who were building incredible technology on these platforms, solving Africa's problems. We began to see that in climate change. You got to see that in finance, in social protection. So I, as somebody that benefited from the previous generation, started investing, advising, and mentoring some of these entrepreneurs. We began to see that the youth population of Africa took their destiny to their own hands. Because normally what you see is that a lot of Africa's youth want to migrate to Europe. Today we have a big migration problem. They want to migrate to the US. When I was going to school, that was the in thing to do. You either get a job or you leave the country. But today there is a paradigm shift. It's a very, very powerful paradigm, where that same generation believe that they can build the next Facebook. They believe they can build the next Google because they have access to technology. And so a lot of them are guys who either gone to college or have not gone to college, but using the web, they are able to learn how to program. They're able to learn how to solve business problems. And they're able to take their destiny into their own hands. So in 2015, GSMA, which is the Global Association for Mobile Operators, decided to look at the impact of mobile on the global south. So they did a study which was quite incredible, and they realized that in Latin America, the impact of mobile was around 4%. In Southeast Asia, it was 1.4%. In Africa, it was 6%. Now, this is very important for us impact investors to understand the impact of mobile. Because sometimes when we talk about impact, most people assume that impact is when you're solving water, electricity, basic needs. But what you're seeing here is that mobile is beginning to make such incredible impact by people just having access. So this impact you're seeing here is people having access to mobile. Now, the next iteration of impact you're going to see is the younger generation begin to develop technology using mobile. And I believe that impact is going to be much more, that's going to be bigger, because you're going to see double-digit impact, because now you begin to see that the creative juices are beginning to flow. In the next slide, you will see this in Ghana, where I'm from, and you can see that in this study, Bloomberg looked at the impact of ICT on the sectors of our economy. And they realized that in the space of 3 years, the impact of the ICT sector surged 238%, to the extent that 239%, as you can see, to the extent that the impact of the services from the ICT sector was the highest within that period. And that impacted our global rating. And you begin to see this in Kenya. You're seeing this in South Africa and a few other countries. Now, the third most important thing that you need to measure in terms of impact is the return on capital. Because if you're an investor, you always want a return on your capital. We all talk impact, but fundamentally we want to get return on our capital as well as make impact. Now, this study is a very important study that looked at the impact of the mobile, what they call telecom, media, and technology companies, TMT. So to look at 40 of these companies on 18 stock exchanges across Africa. So this is not NASDAQ, this is not London, this is not Europe, just the stock markets in Africa alone. Over a period of a decade, they realized that the analyzed returns were 19%. Now, the returns outstrip oil and gas and the African index. So there's no way you can tell me that the African rising narrative is a resource narrative, because the tech sector almost 3 times outperformed the oil and resource sector. Unfortunately, this data is not made public, and my effort is to make such data public. So if you want to look at investments in Africa, the tech sector is the place to look at. So Africa is not just about resources, it's about creativity. Now, you may ask me, so which countries are really leading this revolution? And these are the countries I call the king's countries. There are 5 countries, and I suppose that if you're in this room and you already know that Africa is a continent, you should know all these countries. Who doesn't know which of them, so I can help you figure it out? Which one don't you know? I presume that you know most of them. Which one don't you know? Just be honest. The green and white one, that's Nigeria. The most populated country, and currently the biggest economy on the continent. Anybody doesn't know any of them? Okay, great. So that's Kenya, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa. So these are the 5 countries that I believe are leading the digital economy across Africa. So you may ask me, how did you come by these countries? Is it just a nice acronym? No. So I did a matrix that has 5 characteristics. The first is economic growth. So if you look at these 5 countries, over the last 2 decades, they've had consistent economic growth with the usual up and downs. And on the back of that is political stability. On the back of that is a very strong free market economy. Now, these are fundamentals that you need in the modern economic era. So these countries satisfy those 3 criteria when it comes to economic growth. The second is the telecom sector. In these countries, you have a very vibrant telecom sector across all the value chain and infrastructure. The tech infrastructure, as I showed you, you can see these countries have multiple submarine cables in addition to other tech infrastructure. The fourth is the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So the last 2 kind of built on the first 3. When you look at the entrepreneurial ecosystem, you see a very active engagement between government, private sector, civil society, academia, and research. And most technopoles or tech innovation hubs around the world thrive around an ecosystem that have these 4 actors actively engaging. So you begin to see that in Africa, in these 5 key countries. And the last is the supportive policies or the enabling environment. In these 5 countries as well, you see this, the supportive policy. And then I came to realize as I look at them that beyond a nice acronym, they actually have certain interesting characteristics. The first is what I call the Kenyan smoothness. Anybody encountered a Kenyan before? Were they smooth? Okay. Were they smooth? Yeah. Okay, great. Now, if they are not, please tell me, because this part of my research, I want to be able to change this. The second is the Ivorian persistence. Anybody encountered an Ivorian before? What do you think of him? Very persistent, right? On the field. He's always persistent, and he scores. The fourth is the Nigerian hustle. Anybody encountered a Nigerian? I think there are many Nigerian stories in the room. What about the Ghanaian? Are the Ghanaians hospitable? Oh, I don't think you encounter Ghanaians. Are Ghanaians hospitable? Yes. Okay, great. And then the last one is South Africa. Are they very diverse? Okay, so you agree with me that these observations are correct. So these are the 5 characteristics that makes the king stand out. So I'm kind of going to try and conclude by making a very important announcement. As part of my investing activity, what I've been doing is getting companies in these markets, investing in them and growing them across the world, across the rest of Africa and the world. By the way, this slide is very important because the combined population of the king's countries is a little over 300 million, which is bigger than the US market. So if you want to really go to a 21st century market that is bigger than the United States, is the king's countries. And so to catapult the kings, I made an investment in a company called Teranga Solutions in 2014. And then this year we met with a Norwegian company of my friend who I'm going to invite. Andre, can you come up? So Andre and I, can you give this guy a round of applause? We met 18 years ago. 18 years ago, I got an email from him and his partner. They started something called Global Entrepreneurs. And they wanted somebody to be an African partner, so I joined. We built it for 6 years, and then we went separate ways. And then last year, we were back here, I was invited as a speaker at NABA, the Nordic Africa Business Conference, had an event here. And there we reconnected again. And then we realized that he had started a company that I had invested in. I had invested in a similar company in Africa. And then we didn't advance the conversation, but then we met at an airport in Berlin in March. And then we decided to spend the time. His flight was delayed, my bag was delayed. So instead of basically bitching and moaning at the airlines, we did a deal. We said, let's merge the companies, and you have a few words to say.
Yes, Eric, that was quite an amazing meeting at the airport. And what happened was that after that meeting, I went to Senegal and I met your amazing team. And I'm very happy to announce that we signed a merger agreement. So we're now creating, I will say, a frontier markets giant where we're combining Norwegian East African tech with amazing technology from West Africa. And right now, I think there is a press release going out that we're creating this company called Hotel Online, which have 50 employees across 14 African countries. 1,200 hotels are using our technology, and we are selling rooms for about almost $500,000 a month. So that is being launched right now.
All right. Thank you very much to Catapult.